Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Boyson, and this week my guest is Frank Forencich. We're going to talk about the topic of rats, frogs, and dogs reimagining health in an alien world. Thank you for coming today, Frank.
Well, I'm just delighted to be with you.
Frank, you've inspired me more than I think almost anyone in my health journey in the past 10 years. And I'll share with the audience what happened. First, when I was studying with Ido Portal's Santa Cruz movement, they were profoundly inspired by one of your books called The Exuberant Animal, which is about the joy of movement and play and how critical it is to our health. Then I read several of your other books and saw that my idea of kind of separating fitness and health out from just how we are in our communities and our environments and everyday life. You really had a unique ancestral point of view, as well as with your background in martial arts, your background in evolutionary biology, your trips to Africa. You have really spent a lot of time working through what is best for our collective in a larger time span than our current sedentary modern life. So that's why we're having this conversation. And guys, I told Frank that through COVID, one of the only things that really kept me from breaking down, because my life, I had dramatic life changes, some of choice, some of just acts of God. And being able to follow some of Frank's rules about building a play-based movement community, we used his workbook. We met in the park, and it was so nourishing and joyful that he gave me this formula for building a play tribe that really was a lifeline through one of the hardest points in my life. So I've always need to thank Frank Forencich for taking the time to write all this stuff down and do all the research for us. So Frank, and his website is humananimal.earth. We'll give you links to his various books and stuff at the end of this and in the show notes. So Frank, the topic you've chosen is of rats, frogs, and dogs reimagining health in an alien world. How do we dig in on this one?
Well, we could just go animal by animal, and I think it'll be revealed along the way. And we can start with the rats. I
Okay,
think,
okay. Why rat? I saw frogs. I got that. Like we're frog in the boiling water. I really don't understand the rat one. So let's go here.
okay, well, the cartoon here is Rat Park, and a lot of people will have heard about the Rat Park studies. And if you haven't heard about Rat Park, a researcher in psychology named Bruce Alexander, he's a Canadian, and goes back to the 1980s, I believe. He was looking at the studies that were done on the so-called addictive substances. So we're talking about cocaine and heroin. And he looked at those studies, and they were all done on isolated rats in cages. And the methodology there was to introduce the so-called addictive substance to the rat in the cage, and lo and behold, they became addicted. So then the conclusion was that these substances are inherently addicting. And Bruce Alexander, he was just a young, like, graduate student. He said, well, how can you trust those results? Because those rats are living in an alien environment. They're under high levels of stress. They're isolated from their peers. They don't have any kind of enrichment at all. And now we're surprised that they become addicted. Of course they would. So he went to his laboratory and he built what is now termed the Rat Park. And it was this structure, big structure, that had everything a rat would want. And it had bushes to hide in, it had run-in wheels, it had other rats to play with, and it was like a little rat utopia, I guess you'd call it. And then he introduced these so-called addictive substances. And lo and behold, the rats, they still had some inclination toward these things, but they didn't get addicted at the same rates. And so they had basically had better things to do with their time. And the upshot of all this is that it kind of put the lie to the biomedical model, where it's hard causality, right? You introduce this chemical into the body and it has a predictable result in behavior later on. And what Alexander said was, well, no, it's context dependent. We are creatures living in social and environmental settings in context, and that context has a lot to do with how our bodies function. And that was a monumental study, at least here in the West. I think a lot of people would look at that and say, well, obviously, but for biomedical science, that was really an inconvenient truth, you might say. So that's why I talk about rats.
I always chime in a little bit from the design thinking perspective as well, because my background for 25 years was in design research. The gold standard was going into the context of whatever it was you were designing. You go into the homes, you look at the way they wanted to use the thing, how they actually use the thing, what they really wanted to do, where their behaviors were coming from. And often the engineering teams who were working in these silos with very, directed linear thought processes would be blown away with what was the environment for this product going to be? And therefore, the best design teams always go out into the field. Recently, as I was working on moving as design stuff, I was thinking about the problem of people falling. So I set up interviews with 10 elders. I went into their homes and I saw just how much stuff there was that you could trip over, and how hard it would be to live a more organic lifestyle getting up and down from the ground. So now I love that you're pointing out that this rat analogy, I feel a little embarrassed. I run on a treadmill, but it's because I'm a little rat. Right? I'm a nerd. I just love to sit and use my computers and read. So I get up and run like a little rat. So keep going. So how does this apply then to your thought process or our thought processes for how we can be healthy and thrive?
Right. Well, the short answer is we have to give more attention to our surroundings, basically, and stop looking at the human animal as some sort of isolated, independent life form, because it's not. I mean, there's more and more evidence all the time of these continuities between the inside and the outside of the body. And these are questions, you might say, of dimension, like how big is my body? And for most people in the West, in the modern West, we tend to say, well, my body is as big as it appears. My body only extends to the outermost layer of my skin and it stops. That's it. That's me. That's my body. My health is inside and the external world is outside. And so that's a hard boundary. And in the context of human history, that's a really weird idea. If you look at indigenous people and aboriginal cultures, they always had this idea of continuity and interdependence with the world. So the skin wasn't a hard barrier. The skin was permeable, literally and metaphorically, to the outside world. There was a sense of reciprocity and this sense that the so-called external world was alive. So we have always viewed ourselves in this bigger dimension and as a participant in a larger ecological flux and flow. And that's reassuring to people, because now all of a sudden you're not isolated, you're not separate from the world, you are connected. And that is something that I think modern medicine needs to take into account. And it's also a soothing kind of idea because we don't feel so alone anymore.
When I helped my son recover from incurable diseases, I had to break every medical model that existed that tried to have that way of thinking. And I remember at times using things like Epsom salt baths, or being really cautious about how permeable the skin was for both positive and negative. And people would just flip out like, no, that can't, what you put on your skin can't affect you. So, and the possibility of the cellular membranes having an ability to discern what gets in and what goes out, and it all being so connected. The main things that we did that helped all were environmental, like the Wi-Fi, the EMFs, the dirty electricity, the chemicals in the clothing, the chemicals in the car. It was, and that breakthrough is really why I started this show. That's why it's the architecture of health, because an architect looks at our environment before they decide how you're going to live. So tell me one way that this is this soothing feeling, this inner, and yet it's so soothing. You're right. At first it was scary to go, wow, we're so connected to so many things, but then it became, and you're totally right, it became soothing to know it's a much bigger, there's something much, but then it's scary. There's some major chemicals and some really bad ideas.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get to that when we talk about the dog.
Oh, okay.
For now, I want to mention another idea that tells us how big our bodies really are. And this comes from the world of epidemiology and a guy named Michael Marmot, who wrote a book called The Status Syndrome. And this one's fascinating to me because as an epidemiologist, he went around the world and he looked at various studies of health and health outcomes in comparison to social rank. And there's lots of good data that he tapped into. And his conclusion was that health follows a social gradient. So in other words, where you are in the hierarchy of your society and your culture makes a huge difference in your health outcomes. And generally speaking, the people of higher rank tend to be healthier than people of lower rank. And the shallow interpretation here is to say that people of higher rank, they have more money and they can shop for organic foods, they can go to the doctor more frequently, they can have a gym membership, whatever it is. And that, of course, is part of it. But for Marmot, it was even more fundamental because it had to do with stress. So when you are of higher rank, you have a greater sense of power and control over your circumstances, over your world. And that psychological sense of having control is a powerful balm for the health of the body. And going the other way, if you are living in poverty, you have almost no control over your circumstances, and your stress levels are much higher, and you're more susceptible to any kind of insult to your body. So this is another reminder of context and setting and predicament and how all that is so important. And yet we tend to ignore it. Right? You go to the doctor, your doctor never asks you about your rank in the hierarchy or these big picture questions, because we still treat the body like it's a hairy bag of water. And, that's the end of it. So that's the status syndrome. And that's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Wow.
And it also tells us why we fight so hard to rise up in the hierarchy. Everybody wants to climb the ladder. We want to get higher and higher. And there's a reason for that. And I think it explains a lot about human behavior. But it also tells us a lot. It's prescriptive. Somehow, if we want more people to be healthier, we have to find a way to level the hierarchy. And inevitably, that takes us into the realm of politics and economics and that kind of thing. And, we have to go there at some point and talk about things like capitalism and socialism and incentives and money and all of that, which, we could be on the show for hours on that topic.
Yeah, and I remember Sebastian Unger's book called Tribe, where when a smaller group of people could be very connected, they were very strict about enforcing. Like if someone was hoarding, they're out. If someone was truly disabled, then the community had resources to help the truly disabled. If someone pretended to be truly disabled, like the consequences were life-threatening. And so we have, and I also like Jared Diamond's books. I think it's called Collapse, talks about how every empire that humans have to have these hierarchical systems, the bigger the group gets. So when you have 30 people, a collectivist structure works, and then you get these ever expanding hierarchies, but the hierarchies always collapse when the king overstretches the resources. And we see the way the imperialist United States military-backed US dollar has overstretched the US dollar is under collapse, and it's time for us to have more, a better sense of collective health that's in the middle, rather than these extremes of high and low. It's not sustainable. In fact, it was always the other way. There was mostly this group connectedness, and then they could edit out the extremes so that the whole group flourished.
Right. There's a group in the UK called the Equality Trust, and they study data from countries around the world. And what they found is that more equal societies function better, and across all kinds of measures, including health. So if you live in a highly unequal society, just that alone is a health risk. So you're actually better off moving to a more equal society that's better for everyone's health.
Yeah. And the United States was only great when we had a thriving middle class.
Right.
That's
right.
under attack. Yeah. So I love this. Yes, this is huge. Yes.
Yeah. So should we move on to the frog?
Yeah. I'm guessing frog in boiling water where you can't feel that everything's gone to hell.
Right. So first of all, this is the metaphor, and everybody has heard about the metaphor of the frog and the worm in water. And the way that metaphor goes is that the frog adjusts and adapts and is eventually cooked to death by the worm in water. Now, in actual fact, a frog will jump out of the water. Okay, so it's just a metaphor. An actual living frog is smart enough to jump out of the water. But the metaphor is still valuable for us because as modern humans, we are in that very situation. So the water is warming, the planet is literally warming, but our environment is also becoming more and more stressful with each passing year. And this is due to all kinds of factors, but in general, there's a sense of acceleration and increasing complexity in the modern world. That stressor, that chronic stressor, is the warm in water for the frog. And we see this all over the place. And it's the world we live in now. The world is so much more complicated, and there's so many demands on our time and our cognition now. Everything's a homework project. We have to manage so much more than we ever had to in the past. So that is escalating. And in fact, you see these hockey stick curves all over the place now. And we as an animal are not accustomed to that rate of change. If you were a hunter-gatherer, your life didn't change much from generation to generation. In fact, if you were a hunting and gathering parent, you could safely assume that your children would have a life very similar to your own. But we can't assume that anymore. I mean, things change so fast now, it's almost minute to minute. So the water's getting warmer. Now, people are feeling distressed about that. And people are feeling despair and anxiousness and all kinds of the psycho-spiritual afflictions because of this. And in come the therapists, in come the life coaches, in come the physicians who want to make us feel better. And this takes us into a paradox, because what if you address the frog in the boiling water and you say, okay, here's a program to help you feel better. Here's a program to calm you down. Here's a program to make you more resilient and more adaptive. And even if that works, what have you done? You've actually deepened the frog's predicament, haven't you? Because now, okay, I'm doing my meditation, I'm doing my relaxation, whatever it is, I can cope, I'm better at coping. But the world continues to accelerate and the stress becomes unbearable. So we have to be very careful with this paradox now. And I think what this does, it calls us to action. We have to look at the systems that are the hot water. We have to become activists, and we have to find ways to help the frog jump out of the water, as it were.
Well, and part of that would be have the therapist stop putting the ice cubes in the water. Like all this wasted effort. I've seen this too. Like one of my When I started my unexpected health journey 17 years ago, and I got a $350,000 bill for all these things, these heroic doctors from Stanford and Harvard, and they were like, and then at the end of the day, it didn't work. And then I simply ate more ancestrally, and the problem went away. So the unsustainability of people just doing things that don't work so that they cope and numb, and we like, oh, I need to adapt to this. It's kind of too with toxic people. Oh, I need to adapt. I need to walk on eggshells. And no, sometimes we just need to be more straightforward and acknowledge what's really going on. And like you said, then we have our reflexes back where we can decide for ourselves instead of trying to like drug or addict our way out of the fact that we are sitting here
Right.
in a predicament.
Right. And in a sense, we need to teach the frog some martial arts skills. We need to teach the frog to fight. We need to teach the frog to recognize what kind of system it's living in, and then help give them an escape route, a practical escape route out of that. And that, for me, is activism. And that's why I use the phrase activism is medicine, because when you act on your context, your system, your predicament, it empowers you, it gives you a sense of agency, and that's incredibly useful.
I love it. Yeah. And I a lot of the there's a lot of, what do you call it, spiritual bypassing. I love that you brought up martial arts, because you accept things are not always going to go your way. And if you don't start with that acceptance, you don't have the humility then to make yourself better or even be prepared when things aren't going your way. And versus I kind of fell into some spiritual bypassing where it's like, oh, rise above. I'm going to be so high vibe. Nothing can bother me. They're just, oh, it's because they had such a bad childhood. I better let them walk all over me. That proves I'm just like better than everyone else. So I love the reality of the body and the frog's reflexes signaling the danger. And I have to say, one tiny thing I've done is I'm a ground squirrel now. I'm not a chair squirrel. I'm readapting. We adapt to whatever context we're in, and our bodies have adapted to this shape of leaning on things. And how's that going to work when we're getting older and we trip over something? It doesn't work at all. So right. Even right now, I have to face the danger of sitting in a chair too much. And even right now, we can engage. This reminds me of your book. I've got to read it. The Enemy is Never Wrong.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Okay. So, but not to derail. So we need our instincts and the recognition of the danger, and then activism, and the like. I could sit here and from my chair complain all day about, oh, in the news I heard this, in the news I heard that, oh, this politician did this, and yet my best activism right now might be putting my ass on the floor and getting up and down from the ground so that I'm not dependent upon those exogenous structures. You know what I mean?
Right. And it kind of suggests and legitimizes a rebellious attitude. You're willing to be rebellious against your circumstances, and that's a sign of health. That wildness, that willingness to fight, that's a sign of health. And the more you do it, I think the healthier you become.
I have to share with the audience too, some of Frank's work, at least back in the beginning with Exuberant Animal, describes setting up these low risk scenarios where you use martial arts strategies for movement, but in a very cooperative, but engaging, where you're pushing each other, and that's training each other up in this safe, very safe way of training up with the lowest risk. So the Exuberant Animal, the workbook has all these games, or these exercises you can just step through, meet your friends at the park. It's amazing. So go ahead though, Frank. This is the frogs. Any more about the frogs?
No, well, I think we covered the frog, and we are advocates for the frog, you might say. We're going to encourage the frog to jump out of the water, but The third animal here is the dog, and similar idea, because this is teaching us about context. Imagine a little thought experiment where you take your dog and you put your dog in the garage and you leave your dog there for weeks and months at a time. And maybe you feed the dog occasionally, you clean up the poop, whatever, but the dog has no stimulation, no other dogs to play with, no toys, no people, nothing. It's just out there. That's an alien environment for the dog, obviously. Now, you wait weeks, months, and then you go out to check on your dog. Your dog's gonna have health problems. Absolutely. His fur is going to be falling out. He's going to be chewing on everything. He's going to have these spiritual problems, you might even say. And so the question is there something wrong with your dog? And the shallow answer is to say, well, yes, of course. Look, his fur's falling out. He's having all these mental problems and he's got these other afflictions. Obviously, there's something wrong with my dog. And so you bring in the veterinarian, they treat the dog, and then maybe the dog gets better. But the deeper answer is to say, no, there's nothing wrong with your dog. This is how mammals respond to incarceration. This is how animals, mammals, people, dogs respond to living in an alien environment. So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with your dog. And by extension, there's nothing wrong with you in all probability because you are also living in an alien world. So I really enjoy that example because what it does, it teaches people that their suffering, their afflictions are really probably not their fault. And that's a liberating view, right? And we have this powerful tendency to focus on ourselves. And so if I am having anxiety or depression or despair or something like that, I'm quick to blame myself. Well, there must be something wrong with me, right? There's something wrong with my body. There's something wrong with my mind. There's something wrong with my personality. There's something wrong with my neurotransmitter level, whatever it is, right? I blame myself. But what if somebody like me comes along and says, well, no, actually, you're probably responding the way any mammal would. And that, I think, reframes our experience in a really powerful way.
I love that. I remember when I used to teach the Golay Method of ancestral posture, seeing the audience light up when I said, no, your body being in this shape, it's not your fault at all. The back pain, we've made this cultural agreement that we're going to squish our pelvises under in a way that cramps our neck. We've made this agreement. The agreement is in our furniture. The agreement is in the height of our desks. The agreement is in the height of our windows. This is totally not your fault, but you're the only one that can do anything about it. So it is empowering to know it's not your fault, that we're healthful adaptations to our environment. Sometimes we have to, like, I had to get all the way sick for me to realize this toxic mold was here. I had to get like my face swollen, my lips blue, my nose. I still didn't know. I felt like the frog in the over boiling water. Like it crept up. I had no way of really being able to tell what was going on until one day I found out the neighbor was doing construction and their mold had blown all over. But the thing was, another thing as I teach more people to liberate themselves through movement hygiene that's based on ancestral patterns, is it's really great to have some kind of measure. Like, how can you check that temperature of the water? How can you check how far off we are getting before we've fallen off the cliff? And for example, now I use muscle testing to tell, is the way I'm standing actually compromising my breath, or do I have the possibility that my most important movement that I do 20,000 times a day is actually becoming regenerative? And so from the inside, you can't tell. From the inside, like you were saying, you blame yourself, like, oh, it must be my genetics. My mom was depressed too. It must be
right. Yeah.
My bunions are genetic. My teeth being crowded is genetic, versus the amount of, I love your word wild. I'm wildly optimistic about when we tap into our design, especially with the superpower of context, how much we can really change But without that awareness, we do get trapped. We get trapped in this separateness and this self-blame. So I love the wild agency that you're proposing.
Right. And it also brings up, there's, I think, two forces that are driving our focus on the individual. And one of them is modern advertising and marketing, because it's all about you. And in fact, they use that phrase, it's all over advertising, right? You focus on the individual. It's almost like a intentional promotion of narcissism, where it's this product or service will make your life better. It's all about you. And that's bad enough, but then modern medicine also promotes this individualized approach. So you go in for an exam, they almost never ask about context or setting or predicament. It's always about what's going on in your skin. So with those two forces driving this contraction of our consciousness, that's not a good thing. We need to be, I think, more expansive in our awareness of the world.
And I love that you talked about that, because yeah, all the studies about what is it, the best cure for depression is expression or service, like getting
Right.
in action. And what is it? Oh, the pharmaceutical companies spend something like 12 times more, I can't remember, on advertising than they do on research and development. So I'm pretty sure they're not really looking at all the context and that's why the top cause of death in the United States is medicine. They're reductionist, patent-based sales. Like if there's crony capitalism, it's the pharma medical industrial complex, because
Right.
and as you're saying, it's in that paradigm of separation. So we had Pasteur, who came up with germ theory, but Beauchamp at the same time came up with terrain theory. And they were both there at the same time, but one crowded the other out because it aligned more with patent-based medicine. Like, oh, I can isolate a germ, I can isolate a medicine, I can put a patent on it, and I can isolate it in you. Versus terrain, if your terrain is robust, you have an organic garden of your micro, your biofilm, your microbiome is flourishing. There isn't a lot of room for invasive species of plants to take root. So they're both true at the same time. It's both our individual and that's a building. A building is a static thing, but it's about the movement in and out of the house. But they both exist, and holding that that they're both true at the same time is tricky.
Nice. Well, there's a group I think you'd be really interested in. It's called Patient Revolution. And they are a group of physicians and patients who have gotten together, and they're pushing back against what they call the industrialized medicine model. And they make a lot of good points, and they've got a book out, of course, and they do trainings. And it's really exciting to see what they're doing, because they're looking for compassionate care rather than an industrial assembly line model. And I wish them well. I'm taking their course, and I'm looking to see what they're up to. But I think people, both physicians and patients, can benefit from reading their website, at least. Seeing what they're
yeah. And there are a lot of great doctors out there who are nothing like what I just said. There's
right.
And there are more and more that are integrative physicians who have emergency industrial medicine or emergency medicine and a more integrated point of view. And if we think back like 100 years ago, the town doctor made house calls, the community was interconnected. There was just and honestly, when I've traveled to France, I remember at the time I was married in an extended family. One of them was going through all these cancer treatments. We were out in this farmhouse way out in the Pyrenees, and a car comes to pick up grandma and take her to her chemo appointment, brings them back. She didn't miss dinner. It was just very this kind of integration of medicine and life. And I really think that's what we're talking about too, is integrating.
Right. And that sounds like a healthy culture. My favorite example, I'm taking drum lessons now. And I'm learning a lot about West African drum culture. So it's Senegal, it's Guinea, it's Mali, all these countries of West Africa.
My people, my people.
Well, it's so exciting to see because it turns out they have a culture of celebration and support. So if you grow up in a West African village, every event in your life is marked by some kind of ritual, some kind of celebration, a drumming and dancing celebration, that kind of thing. People coming out, if somebody's pregnant, if the harvest is coming in, whatever it is, yeah, let's have a party, let's celebrate. That's a healthy culture. And it's very supportive, and I'm sure that they have some pretty good outcomes. There are mental health problems in that culture, but not to the extent that we have.
Yeah, it's one reason I love going to West Africa. I've been like 3 times to study drum and dance for a month each time.
Nice.
And I specifically picked the poorest places because I wanted the biggest distance from contemporary, modern, sedentary, affluent, whatever, Western affluence. And I was not disappointed. That what I noticed was emotions would go all the way through people. It was all the way excitement, but it wouldn't cling to that, or all the way like, and then it was gone. And they would see me with my little crinkled brow. They're like, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? And this sense of me not being fully present. Oh, and that a lot of the indigenous tongues don't have, they're only present tense. They don't have a past or future tense. So it's worth it's an amazing culture. The what is it? Polyrhythms work the brain very differently. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I've studied it for almost 30 years now. It's amazing. Come down to Santa Cruz. We've got classes all the time in
yeah,
drumming and
yeah.
dance. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So taking a look at, and even then, I remember like they own nothing. They would have the same set of clothes that show up
Right.
on their friend. And they called one of my dad's friends had been one of the first Peace Corps members in Guinea in the 1950s or 60s, and they called him because they'd never seen a foreigner, the man with who carries things, because he had like a suitcase, and they were like, like, whoa, he's got this bag. Like, what is this thing? A bag with extra stuff in it? So the connection to an energy lifestyle that's more the people connected to each other than them connected to their things was like, but I have to add to that. The first things that most of my teachers teach when they get to the United States are celebration stuff, but also when they have a family member die, my dance teachers sometimes they won't dance for a whole year because they really honor the loss. And there are all these ceremonies and rituals and everything around it. And what I'm saying is they're getting the full spectrum of life, right? The rites of passage, there's a different thing for teenage boys versus a baptism versus, and those, you know what you're reminding me to do is look for those as they are here and just amplify those or make those. I don't think I've celebrated anything significant since COVID. I got weirdly isolated. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, that calls up this idea of creativity, personal lifestyle creativity, and cultural creativity. And the system that we exist in now sometimes is just so onerous, and it feels like it can't move, it won't move, and it's destined to collapse. And we feel that in our bodies. But the antidote to that, I think, is to be more artistic and more creative in what we do. I mean, we've got all these raw materials we can work with, we can create new lifestyles, we can create new culture. And that is, some people have called that a parallel path. We build something that works for us and just kind of ignore the more onerous system that we live in. So it's not like we can escape to a hunter-gatherer world now, but we can move towards something that might work.
Right. So tell me, in your own life, what are some of the symptoms of this, the way you're creating your life, that maybe will inspire some of us to take more agency over the design of our everyday lives?
Well, there's all this standard stuff about movement, and most people I think know about the fundamentals anyway, and that's all good. But what I've focused on recently is the importance of talking, the importance of speech, the importance of expressing oneself, because along with our climate crisis and our ecological crisis, there's so much fear and there's so much denial that people are not talking about important shit anymore. And it's that in itself is a threat to our well-being. And it's very difficult. So I've got a conference coming up. I'm going to give a presentation on how to speak up. And that's fundamental. We don't encourage enough of that, and we're not talking about our predicament nearly to the degree it deserves. So yes, speak up more. Practice being outspoken. I think that's really important right now, especially for young people, because they're in a real tough situation right now. I mean, it's if you're a young person, if you don't have a pathway through college to some viable career, um, what do you got? And they understand this, they know. So I encourage you, we always have these conversations about conversation. So you got to speak up. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, because what is it? Adapting to being normal in a sick world, there's no glory
Right. That was
in adapting.
Krishnamurti.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love Krishnamurti. He was my,
yeah, yeah,
love him.
yeah.
Yeah, so speak up. That's one reason I wanted to invite you. Your activism has been so powerful for so long, and you keep at it, writing more and more books, giving workshops, making speeches, appearing at conferences. I can't wait till we actually meet in person someday. That'll be amazing.
That would be fun. Yeah, I'd also like to make a pitch for this group I'm working with now. It's called the True Athlete Project. And they're out of the UK, I believe, and Europe in general, but they work with coaches and athletes, and their whole goal is to try and make athletics work better for the athletes themselves and to make sports more relevant to the modern world, which is a great project.
Oh my God. Okay. This reminds me of one of the quotes of yours from Play as Though Your Life Depends Upon It, which is a book that's out of print, but I've read maybe 5 of your books. And this early on hit me when you described, at that time, at least your supposition was that the biggest plague on modern health ever was the invention of professional sports and professional dance, because then everyone we create from the time, say, junior high starts in the United States, at least, we create a culture of passive viewers who are
Mhm.
only getting better at sitting, and we create a culture of cutthroat competition is the only way you get to play. And
Right.
what I loved that you were saying is, and I run into this, it's one reason I teach adults to move. I was a terrible mover even as in middle school. I couldn't even walk a mile easily. I just selected, oh, I'm going to be good at being a nerd. I won't ever be good enough to dance. I'll never be good enough. And that's another reason I'm attracted to West African culture. You know, the 200-pound grandma gets out there and she goes, boom, and everybody goes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
instead of like she's copying her and he's copying him and he's copying him. So one other thing about this is you pointed out our lack of recreational athletic outlets. You see the
Right.
high school quarterback champion in the Midwest, and then he doesn't make the cut in college, and then pretty soon he's got the 50-pound beer belly, and the loss of his athletic career causes all these downstream negative health impacts. So, and one reason I'm definitely going to, and especially when I worked with Freya Faust, and he taught me about how many professional dancers are completely destroying themselves to put on these out of balance, not only the movements being focused on being seen, but the rigor. We're not supposed to do high impact stuff 8 hours a day
Right.
and that's why, of course, the gymnasts retire at 25 or whatever. And that, well, But that's also one reason I'm attracted to GOATA, greatest of all time athletes, is they look at, well, who did make it? Who are the Magic Johnsons that were at the top of their game for 20? And there are formulas for becoming durable in ways, the same ways that toddlers and the world's greatest athletes and indigenous people are. And so I'm just really excited that you're continuing along that vein of, what is healthy athleticism? What is a community invigorating movement practice, whether it's African dance, whether it's drumming, whether it's getting together at the park for play dates. Your leadership, your thought leadership in this area, like, wow. I'd love for every PE teacher in the United States to get more status, and I'd love PE to be elevated as
Right, right.
one of the. It's not a shit. It's not the shit elective. It makes you smarter. It doesn't make you a dumb jock. So
Right. Nice, nice. Well, I compare sports to martial arts, and in the world of sports, especially a high competitive sports, there's a thing called the bench. And if you don't make the cut, if you're not playing really well that day or that week, the coach will put you on the bench. And so now you can't play anymore until something changes. And then maybe you go from the bench and you lose interest because you're not playing, and so then you're out of the system. But in the martial arts, there is no bench. There's no bench. You go to the dojo and sensei will find a place for you, and he will never kick you out unless in some extreme circumstance, right? But everybody gets a place and everybody gets to train, and the competition is de-emphasized, and you just are working on yourself, and it's great. So I think that's a good model too.
So anyhow, I love your inclusivity. I love your collective mindedness. Very inspiring. I love your ancestral point of view, along with your empowered activism to make this life the best we can together. And I think I think that's about a wrap. Frank, so
Yeah.
how can people reach you? I know humananimal.earth is your website. What kind of
Right.
stuff is there?
Well, see the video from France. That was the workshop that we did, and it was super exciting, and people just had a blast. So if you're interested in the games and the tenor of the tone of the experience, you can really see that in the video, and that's helpful. And then all the books are there and how to get in touch with me and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of content to see.
Oh yeah, and you've been at it for so long. You've got a lot of books on Amazon. So everything that you could want to get to about Frank's work is on humananimal.earth. Frank, thank you very much.